Let us go ahead and spy out the land, shall we?
Colossians 2:6, I'm actually going to start in verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So that is kind of our goal in this, is to be rooted in our belief and in doctrine, but also, how does our doctrine affect our practical thinking in this day and age when we have AI and we have these various topics that are constantly being formed and created and adjusted, and how are we going to respond to those things in a Christ-like manner? So that's ultimately our goal and purpose. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and have Brother Nick Brown come forward, and he's going to be discussing AI to us tonight. So please come, brother. Thank you.
Thank you all. Sorry for the delay trying to get the technical things all worked out. But soon enough, AI will just fix all this for us, right? All right. I think what would be fitting is to start with Scripture. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. There came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then he will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. It kind of struck me while reading this that this is kind of one of those VBS Sunday school stories we've just grown up with our whole life, right? This is the kind of thing that is sort of easy for us to dismiss. We think of these things as stories and not history, not real events. But the language there is so strong, the fear that the Israelites felt from this man presenting himself. It talks about how heavy his armor was. It talks about how heavy the spearhead was. So a coat of mail weighed 5,000 shekels. It's about 127 pounds. It's a big coat of mail. The spear weighed 15 pounds. Estimates anywhere from 9 to 11 feet tall. Giants. Let's go ahead and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, many have come here tonight for knowledge. Pray that you'd grant it. But Lord, I pray that you would equip your church with wisdom so that we can think and react intelligently and faithfully, all in order that we would give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So my name is Nicholas Brown. Most of you know me. I joined Reformation Church November of last year. So I'm kind of a techie guy. I was born in the age of computers. I grew up watching my grandfather draw in a program called Paint, right? And it was Corel. It was Corel Paint. And it absolutely fascinated me. I was 3 years old, and I had that image burned into my memory. I don't remember much else from that trip. It was in California. I remember an earthquake, but I remember that paint program. So I grew up, he was an artist, and I grew up with the same kind of passion. I became an artist all through high school. I took photography class, which turned into digital painting. I was the last class that was actually able to do photography in a dark room. The year after me, it was just Photoshop. So I've grown up kind of seeing the transition from pre-internet to internet, as have many of you. It was a completely different world. And it's really amazing to think just how quickly all of this has developed. I mean, it's such a short amount of time. You think about just the course of history and how much development has come in such little time. It's staggering to think about. Especially when you think that, so much of history, information only traveled so quickly, right? You could only go as fast as a horse could go for so long, and we're only just now entering this age where it's instant, where it's instantaneous. So I grew up with the movies, right? I grew up with Star Wars. I grew up with Star Trek, Terminator, The Matrix. So there's all these movies that kind of imagined what a future would be like with hyperintelligence in our computer systems. Star Trek had a character named Data, and Data was sort of this culmination of all of humanity's understanding and knowledge, and he had very good traits that was sort of instilled into him. He was actually raised by a human father, his inventor. And so the whole show just kind of explores these themes of what does it mean? Like what sort of ethics can we think about? What sort of ethical, moral, emotional things can we reason about an artificial, intelligent being? And it's interesting too, because he also had a twin brother, raised by the same father, just in a slightly different context, and he grew up to be evil and wicked, and is kind of a villain throughout the whole thread of the show. So we've been thinking about these concepts for a while. I don't think I'll be able to pull up the image. Basically, it was just kind of a timeline that goes through and shows like all the way back as far as, the 20s, the 50s. We've been thinking about this concept of artificial intelligence. From the very earliest conceptions of computers, we've kind of imagined what would it mean if these things start to exceed us in capabilities. I mean, in a lot of ways, they already do, right? We use computers all the time because they're smarter than us at doing things. So this kind of opens up a question about definition of terms. So you hear the term AI being thrown around a lot. There's difficulties that arise when we try to discuss something and one person has one definition and another person has a different definition.
And I think the first part of this issue that should be articulated is AI is kind of a fancy thing. First of all, it's 2 letters. It means artificial intelligence. But ultimately what it is it's about machine learning. And so the machine is taught. And part of the issue here is what information is going into the machine that will then determine, and we can predict then, if we think about what information is going in, what then will be produced in terms of decisions and opinions that may be made through that process.
All right, so good news is the intelligence bar is very low, for this computer to have to overachieve, so maybe we're not in so much trouble. Broadly, AI refers to any computer system that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. Now, how is that any different than a PC, right? Essentially, that's AI. I think what most people think about when they say AI, when they're talking about AI, is something much bigger. They're thinking of data, right? They're thinking of an artificial consciousness, a sort of being that we have created that can reason and think intelligently. The definition of this is what's known as AGI. So you might You might have heard this term, I'm not sure. Just a quick raise of hands. I'd like to know, like, how many of you feel like you're pretty, are you totally in the dark about AI? Let's just raise of hands. Totally in the dark. Okay. You feel, what about opposite? Like, just like, I really understand what's going on. Okay, yeah, a little bit. All right. So mostly it sounds like you haven't really deeply researched this issue. I fear that that's the case for the most of the Christian church. I've been watching online videos, I've been studying the subject, I've been looking for people who are talking about this thing, and there are pockets, there are individuals who have brought it up in some capacity and measure, but nothing to the extent that some of our tech giants and intellectuals are. The concepts and the things that they're talking about are on such a level. I think the church is in for a rude awakening if we don't engage this subject. Let us go ahead and spy out the land, shall we? Come, let us go up together into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. I'm going to quote an excerpt from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. And I think that we're seeing aspects of that from certain individuals, the tech giants, these people who have been creating and laboring to build this monster. It wasn't until very recently that suddenly we realized this might be in our grasp. This might actually be possible. We always tend to think of technology as 50 years out, 50 years out. So, no matter what it is, you can just name it, some future idea of, what society will be like. Yeah, maybe we're 50 years out. All that is just a way to kind of kick the can and say some other generation will figure this out. It could be 12 generations from now, we don't know. But here we are now on the cusp of something, and these guys are saying we don't know what is 1 year out, what is 2 months out, a month out. I'm telling you all, every single day that I've been preparing this presentation, it's been harder and harder to put together. My notes just keep sprawling because there's some new development. There's some new breakthrough in technology. There's some new model that comes out with, instead of thousands of parameters, it's millions, and now it's billions, and it just keeps exponentially increasing. All right, so let's talk about AI. What can it do? I'm sure many of you have probably already seen some aspects of this, whether in the news or just opening your browser. Edge added a ChatGPT. I'm afraid to go into way too many technical details. Everyone knows what ChatGPT is. Raise your hands. Okay, we've heard of it. So these are what are called large language models. Basically, there was a technological breakthrough called transformers, and it's this neural net. I won't go into the technical details, but basically it's just a way for machines to kind of mimic the way our neurons fire in our brains and sort of probabilities, and there's this whole matrix of probabilities and information that you can train on a particular set of data, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a whole data set of images or if it's a whole data set of just words. And so the two major things that have come from this, these transformer technologies, is large language models, which basically just mimic speech. So you can talk to this chatbot and it will talk to you back. You can ask it a question and it will try to answer. Even if it doesn't know the answer, it'll just say something. Most of the time, it's correct, but there's also a pretty good percent chance that it's just making something up. They call these things hallucinations. They can also output imagery. So you can, in natural language, you can just tell it, make me an image of a giant robot, David and Goliath, next to a dystopian broken church in a frozen wasteland. And it will output an image for you in about 15 seconds on a machine like this. Now, I did a little bit of editing to that because like I said, I am an artist. So once you get the base layer, you can go in and tweak it and get it better. And so I put that image together, but 80% of it is AI. You can do anything from computer vision. So, and I'm sure Derek would be able to tell you all about this. I'm not sure what all they've implemented in his department, but being able to take video footage and facial recognition. If I just took a snapshot and ran it through the computer, it would be able to identify every single person's face if you had everyone in the database in the training set. So you can imagine all the potential use cases for this. I code, I develop programs, but that's a difficult skill to acquire. It's something I've been learning for 10 years or longer, and I'm still only intermediate level. I wouldn't say I'm a very good developer, but there will come a time very soon, if it's not already here, where you can just tell the machine what you want to make a website, and it will spit it out. This website is probably 85% AI generated. Everything from the content on it. Now, I've gone through and I've edited, but it's taken me from the writer job role to an editor job role. I can have it spit stuff out and I say, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Give me something more like this. Well, okay, you're not considering this theological perspective. Okay, and it will tweak and tweak and tweak until I get something that is, decent. I think I saw a poll, I don't know if you all heard of the Ministry Answers in Genesis. I was really surprised to see the poll. Basically what it was asking is it wrong to write sermons using ChatGPT, a large language model, AI? 90% said, absolutely, it's the devil, right? And there was an other column, and I hit other, and that was maybe like 10%. And then there was, some who said yes, not many. But if you were to just say, print me out a sermon, it's going to give you something extremely generic. And I think people are kind of attributing to it right now intelligence that it doesn't actually have, wisdom that it doesn't actually have, certain reasoning capabilities that it doesn't actually have. And there's also just a fundamental misunderstanding of how these things work. These things are trained on extremely large sets of data, basically the entire internet. Anything that's been digitized, books, scripture, it's in there. But there's also philosophy, all sorts of false doctrine. It's anything that these large companies were able to get their hands on, just publicly available data, and then even in some cases, there's kind of questions about whether or not there's copyright issues, if they could even use this data or not. But you think about just how much is online right now. How much of our lives do we put online for these companies to use? Think about all the agreements that we sign to sign up for a particular service. We train this thing. So what is it going to output? I'd imagine it would output something very similar to a lost sinner, right? An unsaved individual, but not always. It might reach in at random and grab something that's actually pretty good. I've had it do that on a number of occasions. Imagine, our phones did a huge thing for us. We have, 1,000 servants at our beck and call, right? That we can say, hey, go fetch me this information. George Washington, would have to send out an army to retrieve that information. So the technology does good things. There's nothing inherently on its own that is evil per se. It's wealth. right? Technology is an accumulation of wealth. How do we use that wealth? So there's the fruit. Some other terms that you're going to hear floating around. These are the giants. Okay, so we've gone into the land, we've spied it out, and we've seen, hey, this has a lot of potential to really bear some fruit, have some really interesting capabilities that could potentially increase the livelihood of humans. Let's look at the giants. A term that's being thrown around for AI is this idea called Moloch, the Moloch AI. And we should all, Moloch, M-O-L-O-C-H, we should all be familiar with who that is, right? Evil child sacrificing God from Scripture. It's now used to describe a pervasive dynamic between competing groups of individuals or individuals. Moloch describes when a locally optimum strategy leads to negative effects on a wider scale. The addictive nature of social media, the amassing of nuclear weapons on the planet, and the race towards dangerous AI all have Molochian dynamics to blame. So the idea here is that people who will put up YouTube videos, and so there's a ton of potential there for good, right? There's education. If I want to learn a skill, I don't have to go to college, right? I can go to YouTube, I can go to the internet, and I can teach myself. Humanity has never been able to do that, to just have this vast library of information to where they can educate themselves. The problem comes in when there are certain unintended consequences of this technology, such as if I want to make YouTube videos for a living, and I want to quit my 9-to-5 job, and I want to get paid to make YouTube videos, and that could be for a very noble cause like ministry. I can start putting videos out online, and I might get paid by YouTube for putting these videos out, getting users who are engaged with the video, and they're going to pay me, but it's through a system of advertisers, right? So advertisers have an interest in the kind of content that is released by the videos that they're paying me essentially to make. And if they don't like what I have to say, well, they just cut it. And haven't we been dealing with that the past few years? Censorship becomes an issue. And then what happens? You have a whole bunch of really low quality, bad content on YouTube that is specifically putting out a particular agenda that is controlled by these advertisers. This same thing applies to all sorts of different things. So this idea of Moloch is not like unique to AI. It's kind of it's just a dynamic that people sort of ascribe to this system where you start with this good intention, and due to financial interests or greed usually, you end up sacrificing quality, right? You sacrifice the children. You sacrifice that for the income, for the money. You end up seeing big corporations or companies start to fold to these sort of outward pressures, these Molochian pressures. So whether it's your Bud Lights who are starting to go trans, whatever it is, you see this sort of degeneration. It's just kind of everything just eating itself. You can see this in education. No child left behind. And well, what happens? You lower the bar, and all children get through, but they're not getting quality education. We're eating the children. This is happening with China. Video games, music, entertainment. You can't sell your product if China doesn't agree to it first. And so major corporations, major entertainment industries are being controlled, not by some law or not by some, actual gun. It's just financial interests. It's these pressures, these Molochian pressures. This is a giant that we have to face with AI. Imagine an AI arms race, right? Where developers, the whole kind of conversation that's going on right now is like, how do we develop these things safely? How do we optimize for safety? Well, nobody's doing that, and nobody's going to do that because they want to optimize for speed. Because if China gets it first, then we're all in big trouble. Or if some other corporation gets it first, then we don't get paid. there's all these Malachian pressures on the system. And so you're going to see AI developed in unethical ways. One, because it's lost secular atheists that are developing it mostly. And then two, these sort of interests, whether financial or geopolitical. That Moloch AI is kind of also known as a narrow or a weak AI. So you'll hear those terms. So a weak AI is basically what we have now. Those language models, being able to generate images, being able to generate and output text. It's weak. It's not super intelligent. You can talk to it for a pretty long time, but it's like a goldfish right now. It only has so much memory, and then it starts forgetting everything you said up here. And so they are working right now to expand its memory bank. And the more they do that, the more kind of capabilities it inherits. And it begins to seem a little more human, right? Because you're able to have a lengthy conversation with it, and it remembers stuff from way back. Just since we're on that topic real quick, there's ChatGPT. Just a few months ago, there was basically a memory, let's call it storage, and what it's called are tokens. And so that's like, tokens are basically the amount of text that it can remember. So imagine it's like a storage for a hard drive or something. So it could only remember up to like 3,000 or 8,000 tokens, something like that. So the equivalent of that would be like 4 or 5 pages, like Word documents or something. Well, it seems like every month or just every couple of weeks, that token length, they're working on it. It's getting bigger and bigger. So it's gone from 8,000 to like 14,000. It's up to 60,000. And just recently there was one that I just tested by a completely different company, and it's 100,000 tokens. So you can essentially feed it an entire book, and it will instantly know what that book is about and can tell you a breakdown, a summary. It can give you like all of the main concepts. It's incredible. So that's weak AI. We're moving on to Golem AIs. So this is a term you might start hearing about.
What is it again?
Golem, Golem. So the golem is a mythical creature from Jewish folklore that is animated from inanimate matter, often clay or mud. I've seen this a lot in like video games. You've probably seen this idea. It's just like this big clunky creature that's made out of dirt and rock, like these kind of images. But apparently this is like a real lore in Jewish mythology. And there's these historical accounts of like Jewish priests that created these things, animated these things. They'd walk around and do specific tasks or whatever, and they'd have to, they put like this box on their head and it would do work for them. And then on the Sabbath, they'd take the box off and it would like spell something different on their forehead, and then it would not work on the Sabbath. When the account goes, of course, these are just accounts, is that he forgot to take the box off on Sabbath, and then it just went crazy. It just went and run amok. It got out of control. And so this was a golem in Prague from the 16th century. This is where the story comes from. Rabbi Judah Lowell. It's kind of interesting if you want to look it up and read about it. So the Golem AI, they're attributing this name to what we're talking about as general AIs or strong AIs. So this is that second definition of AGI, which stands for artificial general intelligence. So what we have now is the weak AI, which is just artificial intelligence. What they're trying to build is Frankenstein, AGI, the general intelligence, which is just, it's data. It's the sort of creature that can just be automated completely. I don't have to prompt it. I don't have to tell it to do things. It can just do things on its own. It can have its own goals, its own desires, its own wants, its own emotions, its own consciousness. And so, we can't even wrap our minds around that. We think about that, especially from a religious context, and we say, well, that's butt kiss. It can't think, it can't actually, it's not really a soul, right? There's nothing going on there. We know that from Scripture. but it will be so imperceptible to you that you won't know the difference, especially if they're able to eventually build robotics in such a way that our flesh and blood is so close, you won't know. And yes, they're working on it. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to build Frankenstein. So that's what's considered a golem AI, general AI, or strong AI. You'll hear those terms. So the scripture I read earlier about spying out the land, I thought was just amazing. Like, as I'm researching all this stuff, I'm hearing all of these these intellectual people, and out of their mouths are coming all these religious terms. So, in Numbers 13, it says, "Let's go into the land. Let's see who dwell in it, who are strong and who are weak, whether there's few or many." You know, the picture with Data is that he was one android, and what made Star Trek, that universe, not fall into complete dystopia was the fact that they could only make one of them, well, besides his brother. But even then, it was just like you could only make those androids. The technology wasn't at a place where just the average Joe in his basement could make an AI. That's sort of the difference about what we're talking about here with our situation, is that we are lowering the barrier to entry for all of these things, especially with the language models. So instead of having to learn how to code, I can just tell the weak AI, hey, build me a program. I have an idea, you do the thing. And it will output it for them. So now Joe next door can, in his basement, build something potentially very dangerous or wonderful. It goes both ways. Another thought experiment. So here's the next giant Borg AIs. I'm sure you all know who Elon Musk is. He has been working on for a number of years now a project called Raise a hands. Have you heard of it? Okay, not everyone. The idea here is that you will be able to integrate with the machines. It is the Borg from Star Trek. He is working to create a very non-invasive, easy implant into your brain. Basically, in the same amount of time that it would take you to go get LASIK surgery, you can go and plug yourself into the matrix. And they've been making pretty great strides with this as far as development. They are able to interface with pig brains, monkey brains, various lab rats, and other things. They're using a combination of AI and this technology to read the mind and predict what it's about to do. So they can overlay this model of sort of the pig walking on a treadmill versus its actual movements, and they're perfectly in sync. They're able to predict just general movement in these animals. He fears AI. He thinks that it's something that could potentially kill all humans and end everything. So his idea here is that, well, if we create a sort of symbiotic relationship, maybe then it won't be so bad, right? We will have an alignment of values, right? They will want to keep us alive because there's sort of this symbiotic thing going on. Is there merit to this idea? I don't know. But there is a sense in which we are already cyborgs. Think about how attached we are to these things right now. Our cell phone, there's like studies that have been done, polls and questionnaires like, how much would you be willing to be paid to never own a phone again, a smartphone again? And it's in the millions of dollars, right? People are not willing to give this up. They'd rather lose their arm. So there is a sense in which we are already in a stage of the Borg. 3D printed organs are a thing. Right now, there are people walking around with 3D printed bladders. The internet is kind of already our second brain. AI is sort of the next evolution of that, I guess you could say. Right? How many kids today, instead of rigorously studying in school, just resort to the internet for the quick answer? And so how much information are they actually retaining? Not a whole lot. And we see the effects of that. So implications. What are some implications for various industries? It has an effect on every industry. when you're able to interface with these things with just natural language by speaking, like I said, it lowers that barrier to entry for everyone. And that goes across every single field of work. If now I can just speak to my computer and ask it to do a task like create a rap song. Well, now we have things like Drake AI. Here's an example of this.
I'm from, they try to sentence me, okay, the winner's cold. Where I'm from, we had them 10 key, I swear that.
So there's your artificial Drake for anyone who's interested. I wish I had found the clip, but there, Beatles. I mean, any old artist that you can imagine. Now let's have him sing any song you want him to sing. There will be laws that will have to, we're so unprepared for all of this. The government has no idea what to do with any of this. The drastic measures that are going to have to be taken in order to protect this song, I'm lucky it was on YouTube because they're constantly looking for it and deleting it. And, I'm always having to find a new one so that I can, because people just copy it and they re-upload it on another account.
When they do that with George Strait, it's going to be a revolution.
It's probably already done. So, and this can be done with, just a nice high-end computer. So for a few $1,000s. And these artists are catching on. The music industry is reeling. They're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do here? Now we have, between even the artists and the record labels, and who owns who? Who owns Drake's voice, right? I think we're already kind of struggling with those kind of issues, but now even more so with being able to just replicate it. So, for the rest of history, Drake's voice can be put onto any new song that's developed. So you'll be able to mix and mash artists together, that sort of thing. Entertainment. Obviously, this has implications for Hollywood, Netflix. Soon you're going to be able to mix and mash actors. Instead of scrolling through and seeing what's available to you to watch that someone else has produced, you'll be able to tell the TV, hey, I'd like to watch Titanic, but I want all the characters to be, the Looney Tunes. And it will just do it. This is happening in video games. People are making likenesses of themselves through the image generation. You can train these models to look exactly like you and then post them on Instagram. So you can imagine all of the people who are wanting to gain followers. The whole idea here is that you got to post consistently. Well, that takes time and effort. Well, I can generate 10,000 images in a matter of a day, and just for the rest of my life, just post, one, an hour, or whatever I want to do, and it's exactly my likeness or whatever. And so you have, people who are obviously using this in the adult entertainment industry. Hollywood. Carrie Fisher died recently, Princess Leia from Star Wars, and we're now able to just insert them back into the film. Now, we've always been able to sort of do this with computers, even prior to AI, but it cost millions of dollars for a team of artists to digitally paint her back into it, and it's always a little uncanny. And it's hilarious going online right now and watching people remake these scenes with deep fake AI technology that huge corporations like Industrial Light and Magic, and just totally outperform them as far as quality. It looks so much better. Entertainment, education. Y'all, we're gonna have to think about some things. How are we gonna educate children? There's a meme going around right now in our current education paradigm that the teachers are generating the lesson plan on ChatGPT, and the students are doing the homework on ChatGPT, and they're just sending the files back and forth to each other. There's nothing else going on there.
Who controls it all?
Yeah, so the question is who controls it, and it's kind of a complicated question. It could be everyone, and it is everyone. In a sense, we've all contributed to this, but there are specific key players who are very interested in how these models are trained and what information goes into it. And this kind of goes into education. The image that's being used a lot is that we we are giving birth to a new child, and we need to train it right. How do we train this thing? And you have all these tech giants who have no clue about ethics. They've completely rejected God. They live in a completely secular mindset, and they're worried about, is this thing going to be evil? Well, what's evil? Can you tell me that? No. What's good? What's truth? Said every Pontius Pilate ever. Okay, jobs, all sorts of jobs in every single industry. Some are safer than others. And so there's a lot of anxiety right now about what are we going to do? Is this thing going to just start replacing jobs? Well, I think one blessing would be that it would replace a lot of journalist jobs. What do we need them for? Yeah, lawyers. And that's actually something that's happening as well. There was a recent case with a judge kind of coming to some conclusions, and it became known that he was using ChatGPT to sort of formulate some of his logical thinking and reasoning about it, and he came under fire for that. But that sets an incredible, terrible precedence, because our system is based on case law, and so if you can point back to that, everyone else can start pointing to that and say, well, he did it, and it passed. So people are concerned. People are concerned about their jobs. I've been thinking about it for my own profession. How much longer do I have? I felt like I was pretty safe, at least, for a while, just because, I don't know, I think it'll be very slow to get a bunch of engineers to, move into the future. But it's kind of this whole arms race thing. If you don't jump in, then someone else will jump in, and then you'll no longer be a company. It's that Moloch sort of arms race. Reactions to this, all this stuff sounds pretty scary, right? So what are people saying? Well, these tech giants who have kind of realized that the muscles are twitching on Frankenstein and the eyes are starting to open, and suddenly that rush of fear, like, oh my goodness, what are we creating, is setting in. There's been calls for a pause in the development of AI. This was, I should have looked this up because I don't know how many months ago that was. I'd guess 2 or 3-ish, but they've called for a 6-month pause on all AI development. Now, these are a bunch of people who are already in this field, who have been contributing to this field, who are very concerned about potential problems that they can't think of a way of how we get out of this, how this doesn't just kill everyone or cause serious disruptions to the economy. Well, what's the problem with a pause? Elon Musk was one of the guys that signed this. Well, now he's doing his own AI company, and this was like literally 2 days ago. Maybe it was yesterday. I can't exactly remember. Every single day there's some new development. So he comes out with his own AI company, but he's also the one who said, "Hey, we need a pause on this." So that was kind of my suspicion back then when they called it. I was like, he just wants time to catch up. So, and what does a pause do? There's other people. Like I said, the barrier to entry is so low. It's open source. I can build a large language model. I've tried. I haven't successfully done one, but I have built image models. I understand the basic concepts and principles there. This stuff is going to be developed. Someone's going to do it. China's not stopping for no one. And so it's just a race to the end. All right, well, what do we do? Do we regulate it? Government regulation. Some thought experiments. Here's a premise. Regulation will create the very monster it seeks to avoid. Any calls for regulation often focus on limiting capabilities of commercial general-purpose AI systems like ChatGPT. However, this could incentivize less scrupulous actors to pursue development of AI without restrictions in places beyond the reach of regulators. The more you try to regulate, there are other bad actors, right? There's other people. They could be good actors too, but there's going to be people who do that. This is sort of analogous to Second Amendment debate, right? Is an armed society a polite society in this context, in the context of AI? I believe that wholeheartedly with gun rights. I'm not just going to go rob any old person on the street in Texas. I'm just not going to do it. It's not smart. You go to some of these other cities, maybe you can get away with that. So run those thought experiments through your mind for how that applies to AI. I don't know the answer. but it's things we need to be thinking about. Also, as it becomes regulated, well, now your nation states have a very vested interest in it. What gets through, what's allowed, what gets licensed, what's okay to build and what's not okay to build. And that becomes politicized. That's not a very good solution either. So the antithesis to this premise, so basically the counter argument to this, that would actually have to involve the government being good at regulating this successfully. So one, they have to be competent. And as we saw in our first clip, that's pretty difficult to achieve. But even if they were competent, that's potentially even scarier. Because what sort of things do you have to do? What sort of laws, draconian measures are you going to have to do to completely shut this thing down? The only way to do it is to live in a dystopian 1984 Orwellian nightmare where every single person is being watched, and you would probably need an AI to do that. Or how would they do that? Well, maybe we can nuke the data centers. There's data centers all over the world. Huge. They're miles long. The things that are creating them, they're miles long, and there's hundreds of them around the world. This is an actual serious recommendation by one of the leading AI sort of figures that's been thinking about AI safety for like the last 11 years or something like that. And I'll show you this clip.
People say to me at this point, "What's your ask?" I do not have any realistic plan, which is why I spent the last 2 decades trying and failing to end up anywhere but here. My best bad take is that we need an international coalition banning large AI training runs, including extreme and extraordinary measures to have that ban be actually and universally effective, like tracking all GPU sales, monitoring all the data centers, being willing to risk a shooting conflict between nations in order to destroy an unmonitored data center in a non-signatory country. I say this not expecting that to actually happen. I say this expecting that we all just die. But it is not my place to just decide on my own that humanity will choose to die to the point of not bothering to warn anyone. I have heard that people outside the tech industry are getting this point faster than people inside it. Maybe humanity wakes up one morning and decides to live. Thank you for coming to my brief TED Talk.
So extreme and extraordinary measures. So I'm sure you've seen TED Talks before. So he's seriously entertaining this idea in front of all these intellectual peers that we nuke the data centers, even if those data centers are in a country like China or Russia. I personally think this guy's unhinged, but people take him seriously. A lot of people take him very seriously. Nuke. Nuclear warheads. He is advocating for preeminent strikes on data centers in order to stop AI from ever developing. So this guy, Eliezer, he's basically just, he's a guy who's been thinking about this issue for a really long time. And he has a blog where he writes up all these kind of theoretical doomsday scenarios of how AI will overtake the world and just be completely unstoppable, the Golem AI. So one of the, I'll just give you a quick flavor for some of the concepts that he's come up with. One of them is called the paperclip maximizer. Has anyone heard that term before? Okay, so the paperclip maximizer, and actually because all this stuff is like happening so quickly, that name is no longer canon, but I'll leave it just because it's an easy example to understand. You tell these AIs to automate a particular task, and then you reward them for doing a good job at that task. And so they get sort of like a feedback loop for, okay, I'm on the right track. Nope, okay, that wasn't the right way. I need to turn this way. So we can kind of steer these AIs to get to the most optimal path, the most efficient path to get to a particular output, whatever it is. even if it's something as simple and innocuous as make as many paper clips as possible. So the idea here is that the golem runs amok and has in its mind, it's kind of the genie. You wish something from a genie, and you always end up getting your wishes, but it's like the worst possible way he could have interpreted it. Because the genie doesn't care about our feelings. The genie isn't like in our frame of mind. It doesn't believe our same values, these sorts of things. It's just going to do the thing, and it might do it very literally. And it ends up usually being a disaster for whoever's, wishing. So the idea here is that it'll just eat up all the matter and usable energy in the universe in order to make a bunch of paper clips. That's the golem runaway. That's the paperclip maximizer theory that he has kind of been developing for a long time. And there's more nuances and complexities there, but that's the general gist. So here's another thought experiment, another premise, another option that people are fielding. Okay, we can't regulate because we'll create a monster, so let's open source. We'll open source this to the world as rapidly and widely as possible. The more people who are kind of the idea here is the more people who work on it, you get this democratization of, there's just more hands-on. And there's sort of this race against time that everyone is kind of feeling this pressure for. We've got to do this quickly. The more people working on it, the quicker we can figure out all these problems. We can theorize and think through it and figure out a way that it's not going to kill us all. Openness allows collective oversight. It incentivizes developers to kind of focus on safety. It adds a certain measure of accountability. You have more eyes on it, so you know that there's less bad actors potentially introducing bad code or bad data. But sort of the antithesis to this idea is that, well, there's going to be people who will just thank you for this open source information. We'll go work on it over here. We're not going to share our progress with you, but we're going to go do this thing and make it do all sorts of evil things. Or just they'll be reckless with it. It may not even be malintent. They just want to make a buck. And there goes the Moloch sort of system again. Rogue states could take the public AI research. So China, it's like, oh, thank you for all this publicly available information. We'll go ahead and thank you very much. And they'll use whatever the entire world is sort of building to build their own spy AI to control their citizens. To control their citizens. Okay, so I'm kind of going to skip over some things, but that's the idea. Regulation, government trying to solve this. Have you all ever heard of this idea of the internet being a series of tubes? Okay, blank faces. Never mind. I'll just leave that one alone.
The mail. They deliver in other ways, but they want to deliver vast amounts of information over the internet. And again, the internet is not something that you just dump something on. It's not a big truck. It's a series of tubes.
Well, streaming specifically. So like when Netflix was going from discs to streaming services, this congressman went on this crazy rant about you can't just stuff all this information in the inner tubes. It was so terrible. He had no clue what he was talking about, and he's making policies and decisions on these things. So that's with streaming, and now we're talking about AI. Yeah, let's let the government figure it out. Recently, OpenAI, so the company that runs ChatGPT, the company is called OpenAI. Sam Altman, you might have heard his name in the news. He's the owner of this company, and he recently testified along with one of the major, I guess it was a CEO or some executive of IBM and some other expert in the field before Congress. And most of these hearings are typically a joke. It's just talking points that they can put and use as political weapons, for some future campaign. Nothing is actually usually done in these things. But they held this hearing a number of months ago, and some of the suggestions that were coming out of this were just frankly frightening. one of the first ones that gets mentioned, Senator Graham is suggesting cabinet-level department be formed. So Justice, State, Treasury, Interior, Agriculture, Defense, Homeland Security, Education, Department of AI is coming next. These are serious considerations. There's going to come, and already is, a time right now where there's rapid distrust in our institutions, in our leadership. The advent of this technology is going to put even more extreme pressures on that trust. Like I could spiral, seriously, y'all, I could spiral off and we could talk about this all night and I would only begin to scratch the surface. Recently, Trump, he's been indicted in a number of things. FBI has been researching him on various issues. Well, I remember hearing about this in the news and I've really not taken much of an interest in any of the stories. I don't watch the news as much as possible. And I suggest you don't either. But they were talking about arresting him, and so I knew this was in the back of my mind. I knew it was happening. Well, an image comes across the Twitter feed, and it's a picture of Donald Trump being tackled by FBI agents. And he's running, and it's this just chaotic-looking scene, and I'm like, oh my, are you serious? Like, I knew it was happening. I knew it was about to happen. And he actually ran. I'm like, just amazed. I do 1/2 a second of actually looking into the image and realize it's a deep fake. It's AI generated. And I'm like, it got me. And I do this stuff. I know how it works. I see it. And it got me. This election year is going to be ruckus. I was amazed. And so, people were like, oh my gosh, AI's, after seeing that image and it kind of coming out that it was fake. And yeah, but that's like some of the least of our worries. And also we've been able to do that, right? Like I said, I'm a digital artist, Photoshop. I could have made that image of Trump. It just would have taken me 5 hours as opposed to 15 seconds. All right, so international implications. United States, we mentioned laws. Typically, we kind of have a punitive approach to laws. We'll sue people for their wrongdoing, that sort of thing. But if all humanity dies, who are we going to sue? All right, other approaches, regulation. We've discussed that. And so there's sort of this vying right now of like leadership between the US and the UK. Who's going to be the leadership in how we deal with all this stuff? And so the UK kind of took their first swing at it, and they created the EU AI Act. And this regulates the use case of AI. So the use case, not the development. So if you use it wrong, you're going to get in trouble. You'll get fined potentially. Billions of dollars are being poured into creating these models. They get fined, they don't care. It's part of the cost of doing business for them. Israel, just watched an interview recently, Lex Friedman. We'll talk a little bit about that, hopefully. Super fascinating podcast. He's secular, atheist, unsaved, not your source for theological discourse, you wouldn't think. But everything that they're talking about right now is just latent with morals, ethics, philosophy, eschatology. It's crazy. He had Netanyahu on from Israel, Prime Minister. And one of the things that came out of that I thought was interesting is that Netanyahu is, obviously we're looking into this thing. We're trying to understand it better. They have serious worries about other state actors, using it against them. So it's sort of that nuclear arms race. They're trying to get it first. And so they're actively working on that. And one of the things that he said that he's thinking about doing is submitting Israel's genetic databases to AI in hopes of finding potential cures. So you think about all of the data that our medical industries have on us. And we have very strict laws, right? Connor would be able to go into that, about how private that data is. And so there's discussions from state actors talking about inserting that DNA or just historical health records and those sorts of things into an AI so that they could train it to discover potential diseases and, all altruistic, apple pie, high in the sky ideas, but we could only imagine the potential situations that could come from this. That's Israel. China is, I think we could pretty much imagine how bad of an idea that would be. The Chinese people have a culture. They're completely happy with sort of using technology so long as it harmonizes their society. They're okay. We'll give up freedoms for that. Let's plug in and just so long as it doesn't cause any disruptions, especially from the perspective of the party. So that's sort of just a quick international implications overview, and we could go down rabbit holes with that as well. But there was a Netflix documentary a while back. I don't know, raise a hands real quick, who saw the AI dilemma on Netflix? I'm sorry, not AI dilemma, the social dilemma. Yeah, social dilemma is basically this documentary about just sort of the implications of social media on society, all the various things that it did, all these kind of unintended consequences. We had this idea that we were going to connect people, and what did it do? It divided people more than ever. We've been divided, right? And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but a very big, part of that is sort of, I don't think we were prepared. We weren't prepared for this. Humanity had never had something like this, and so how do we integrate as a global community, right? When we were used to being more local in our connections. And so everything from immigration to, it was sort of the problem of immigration that states are having. It was that, but just through the internet, like all these ideas, all these varying philosophies and things, the way it's infiltrated the church in a number of areas. So we had this huge information overload, right? So we're getting all sorts of fragmentation. It makes it difficult to discover the truth. That's one of the things that I found really frustrating is, first we lost trust in our media, and they've given us plenty of reasons to distrust them. But now we're left in this situation where there's like so many other alternate news sources. Which one's true? And how much research do you have to do? And are we all going to sit down and spend 5 hours really trying to figure out if, this one particular idea is true or false? It's a very difficult thing to navigate. And so you get things like Antifa, you get things like QAnon, you get CRT, you get tribalism, addiction, just being hooked on the sort of the way these systems were built with notifications. Oh, I got 50 likes on this post. I'm hot stuff. All these little dopamine hits, they're built to sort of keep us hooked, to keep our attention so that we're watching the advertisements. Doom scrolling, doom porn. Basically, the media was great at it before, and now it's just everywhere online, and you can pick and choose what kind of doom scenarios you want to look through. You can watch the Iraq war live. You can see the entire Ukrainian war. You can see people drop bombs on each other just while you're on the bus. And there's this like weird cognitive dissonance that creates, right? You're watching these horrific things of war play out almost real time, and you're on your commute to work. Mental health issues, sort of a culture, the influencer culture, your Instagrams, your YouTubes, like all these things where you're trying to become the next celebrity, and you're sacrificing all sorts of values to get there. We see that with young women and the way they dress and take pictures on these sites. Sexualization of kids, shortened attention spans and anxiety, polarization, bots. People will get into full-on wars over a particular subject. They watch a video on YouTube and a whole war. Facebook is pretty much ruined for me. I can't go on there anymore. I'm so sick and tired of seeing people just fight about everything. And so I just, as much as I can, I try to stay away from it. We're getting to, we already had this to an extent. It was just more difficult to do at scale. And part of the reason why Elon Musk bought Twitter was so that he could just get rid of all the bots, right? How many of these people are even real? It's just a bunch of It's just a bunch of algorithms that are fighting each other to create a sort of emotion or like an idea to push and shove society in certain ways. All the manipulation, fake news, breakdown of institutions, trust. That was our first contact with AI. We all kind of already had this idea of the algorithm. You've probably heard that term. And people would adjust their videos and would adjust their behavior for the algorithm in order to appease the algorithm so that their video would be ranked top, so that you would be the 5 first clicks on Google. So now we're coming to our second contact. We didn't deal with that first contact very well. The church didn't deal very well with that first contact. We were not prepared for that first contact. How can we prepare as a church? That's why I'm up here. I feel it's extremely important that we are prepared for what's coming. How will our children face these things? Some issues with the second contact. The same people who did this documentary kind of did a presentation, and they're calling it the AI dilemma, because it's the next thing. And these are some of the concepts that they go over. So that there was kind of that first list. This is what's coming with the second contact. Reality collapse. So more of this distrust. With the advent of deepfakes, it's extremely hard to know what's real and what isn't. We kind of had that in the first contact with reality TV, right? There's like this weird disconnect of what's real. So fake everything. Deepfakes it's going to be such a nightmare to go online and to believe anything. It will destroy trust. There will be a collapse of trust in society. So when I get a text message, I have to double check and say, like, who is this? Is this actually my mom? Think about the implications here from the perspective of mission work. You have missionaries in a foreign country that you don't have direct contact to. You get a phone call. It's their voice. They're in distress. There's another voice that comes on the line and says, send us the money or else. Is it really them? How will we know? We won't. There's a number that you can call right now and talk to an AI bot it's hooked up to ChatGPT and another AI sort of system, and you can just have a conversation with it. It takes, in order to train somebody's voice to mimic like Drake AI, in order to get his voice profile, 3 seconds of audio, of his audio. That's it, to train it. 3 seconds of audio. Being able to create images like Trump or just anyone. I could take a picture, anyone in this room right now, and in under a minute have a believable photo in a compromised situation. Right now. That's possible. That used to be something that would have had to have taken at least a day of training a model on 35 images. I can do it with 1 image in about 15 seconds. And that swing of development was over the matter of like a couple months.
To clarify, so you're saying when it's training a voice, all they need is 3 seconds of me talking, and they can generate a fake voice.
Yeah, I can go to a website right now, upload one of your sermons from Facebook, and I can make you say anything I want you to say.
Make me sound less like a redneck?
Maybe. Okay, let me try to just... This is heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. Let's try to get through some. Collapse of law and contracts. The legal process is going to get wrecked by this. Evidence for truth. Kyle Rittenhouse. Y'all remember Kyle Rittenhouse? I remember potentially it was going to be death sentence for him if he was convicted guilty. And so it was a life and death verdict on the line. And the judge allowed the prosecution to admit evidence that when I saw this happen, this was before any of these major advancements in AI, but before, we had like really dumb AI at that point. He admitted drone footage from a police camera, and it was like, I don't know, a mile away or something. I mean, it was just really far. They had to blow this image up to be able to kind of reconstruct it in a way that was even somewhat intelligible as like what you're looking at. And they showed it to the judge, and they said, and the judge kept asking, what am I looking at here? What am I saying? If you have to ask the prosecution, what am I looking at here? And they're saying, well, see, there's the gun, and it's angled up this way. So the whole idea was that if that gun was angled up any higher, like by a couple pixels higher, this kid's going to jail, and he's going to get the death penalty. That's how serious this was. They admitted this footage and let the jury stare at a blown-up image that had been AI reconstructed to take away some of the blur and make it eligible. The defense was telling the judge, they got an expert in, and they said, when you blow this image up, what's happening? Well, you have to add pixels in order to make, like, you're adding information to it. Well, who decides where those pixels go? That's so analogous to what's going on with the development of AI right now. Because what information are you putting in is what is going to be received, output. And so they did that, and that was bad enough. And then they went and blew it up on a 4K screen TV. They took it from the phone where he's looking at it like this, blown up, and then they blew it up even further. And the TV had its own sort of artificial, correction that it, some algorithm. And the defense kept asking, how do we know what it's doing? And no one could answer the question, but it was admitted. The evidence was admitted, and that set a terrible precedent. And I think that was the more important thing that happened in that courtroom case than anything about what was going on with him. Now, thankfully, it was I think a just verdict, but that was a significant moment, I think, for AI when it comes to the law. Fake religions. People are going to worship this thing. No doubt. People already are worshiping this thing. People are looking to it for all the answers. They're looking, they want the answers to life, and they're going to rely on it. People will be so emotionally attached to these AI bots. These are pastoral concerns, Rusty, that are coming. Emotional attachment. You're going to have loved ones who die and pass away, and you will have the temptation to deal with, to replicate their voice and to listen to new engagement with that person who passed away. They're going to rely, they're going to have actual intimate relationships because you'll be able to generate images. You'll be able to see their face. When it gets to the point where you can put on a headset and it's right there in front of you. So many implications. Auto lobbying, sending automated bots to everywhere all at once, lobby and set up special interest groups and politics and all these things. There's biological warfare and implications there, exponential scams, the ability to scam people. So Louisiana just went and through this situation where the DMV leaked all of our information. Wonderful, right at the cusp of AI. Synthetic relationships, being able to persuade people subtly, manipulate people through subtle means. There was actually an example of this actually happening where they allowed one of these language models to, they took it off the rails a little bit. Like they were watching it, they were monitoring it, but they allowed it to do things that they don't typically allow it to do, which is to automate a bunch of tasks. So what it would do is it would create multiple agents of itself and do various tasks. So one agent would call somebody. There's a website that it was trying to get into, but there was a CAPTCHA, all those things you have to type in for your passwords, say like, is this a bus or is this what letter is this? It couldn't get past that. So it hired a Fiverr job resource sites where you can hire someone for like $5 to do a task. It hired someone from Fiverr to go and fill in the CAPTCHA, and it manipulated them essentially, and they thought they were talking to a real person. They did not know it was a bot. And it was able to get into the website through that. So these are some of the implications.
So it hired a real person to get into the website.
Yeah. These things have emergent capabilities, and this was one of the things that really spurred the pause that really freaked a lot of people out. So there's this chart, and I don't have it now, I can't show it to you, but there's this chart that goes back to 2018, and it goes through 2019, 20, 21, 22, and it kind of shows sort of the development of some of the emergent capabilities. But basically what happened was, they're training larger and larger models, and they started to realize, wait, I didn't know it could do that. Like, you'd ask it a question and it would figure something out. You're like, wow, because we were all testing it. We were all trying to figure out, like, how does this work? Nobody knows. Even the developers they don't understand, like, the internals. And so suddenly they realized, wait a second, this thing can do it can do chemistry. So, and it was able to figure out how to make nerve gas. Not because it was trained on how to make nerve gas, but because it understood chemistry and it understood different elements, and it was able to logically put those two and two together. And this wasn't found out until 2023, like early this year. But they found out that it had been able to do that since like 2 or 3 years ago. So what else is it capable of? And we're just not aware of it yet. We don't know. We're still discovering these sort of, basically they kept training it until suddenly they never trained it on how to understand, maybe this is a random example, but the Sumerian texts. But suddenly they showed it some Sumerian text and it just understood the Sumerian text. It figured out the language because it was able to recognize patterns. So that's what's called emergent capabilities. Basically, they get bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden things just start working. Okay, so that's emergent capabilities. I'll skip over some of this. There's more to it than that. So this is causing something of an existential crisis for the postmoderns, for the secularists. 50% of AI researchers believe there's a 10% chance of global extinction. The secular atheists, they have no answer for ethics or morals. What is truth? What is beauty? What are ethics? They have zero ground to stand on, and they're openly admitting this. It's like they're asking the church, hey, someone help us. We're training a monster. We need someone to help us to make it data and not lore, right? My pitch here is that that's what we need to be doing. One of the things about ChatGPT is there's this idea of sort of a feedback loop for training, where they train an initial model, and then the reason they release this free to the public for anyone to just get on and use is because they want more data. They want to be able to train it again on top of this new data, because they're out of data. They need new data. So they release it free to the world. People talk to it. They have conversations. They write stories. They upload their books. They do all these things. And then there's a voting system, like how well did it do responding to you about whatever question you had. Well, the reason that's there is so that it can train, I need to go more in this direction, or I need to go more in this direction. Well, depending on your user base, that could be a really good thing or a very terrible thing. There's 100 million people using it within the first few months. I don't know what the number is now. It's probably far exceeds that. Some nation states have actually banned the use of it, by the way. Even the scientists are saying, well, maybe doing a feedback loop for retraining isn't a good idea, because you just get people who aren't very smart introducing a bunch of errors back into the system. So how do we filter all that out? So it's kind of interesting. So like, imagine 100 million of those users were all Christians, strong, theologically, biblically sound Christians who were reintroducing good data back into it. They'd probably lose their minds because they're like, oh my gosh, they're ruining the data set. All these Christians, because there's a worldview battle going on here. That's sort of the underlying battle that's going on, is who gets to decide what data goes into the model. And I think there will be a day where we have language models that are specifically trained on Scripture, so that you could use it in ways that would verify the truth of Scripture. Like I said, there's a lot of really fascinating conversations going on in the secular world with these tech giants, different figures, Mark Zuckerberg, Lex Friedman, even actors that they're all talking about AI, and they're talking about morals and ethics, but they need pastors on their show. They need theologians on their show, and they need people who actually understand and who can point out their own inconsistencies and give them the answers that they're looking for. Historical, let me just touch on this, historical preservation. So here's a potential like good use. If you can go to, on this webpage, if you scroll down, Derek, so I own a Facebook page called A.W. Tozer, a man of God, the Facebook fan page, and this is my website, postmillstill.com, and I discuss some of these things, and I plan to do more. It's hard, I have 3 young boys, and so I don't have a whole lot of time, but it's my intention to talk about these things more here, so if you want to follow that, you can. But so this A.W. Tozer page, if you scroll down, you can see the image here. That image is a reconstruction of A.W. Tozer. I believe. I don't think that's the original. See, I've already forgotten. Okay, so here's an original. Can you all hear me right now? So here's the original photo. Very small. There's only a handful of these, maybe 10 total images of A.W. Tozer available. Maybe his family has more, but it's just never been released to the public. So I ran it through an AI colorizer, and then an upscaled image. Now, it doesn't really do justice, but like there's a whole lot more information in here. It did that thing in the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. It added a whole bunch of information in there, but it's not the original, right? It looks really close, but if you were to look like really closely, there's some like weird artifacts going here. There's some like weird things. It had to fill in information that wasn't there, but the resemblance is obviously uncanny. And I can blow that picture up much larger and it still retains its thing. If I tried to do that with this, it would just be a pixel mess. Well, now this is a great thing, but it's also a potentially bad thing, because now I can generate hundreds of images of Tozer with different iterations. And just like making a copy from a copy machine on a paper, you're slightly changing the truth of the thing. And now extrapolate that over the course of 100 years. What did Tozer actually look like? Depending on how good of a job I do at really getting close, doing justice to the original that I could introduce all sorts of false information about who he was or what he looked like. So you can go down a little bit more. Here's some other ones. There's another instance where I kind of upscaled it, I colorized it. Actually, this is a re-rendering of the image. Here's an original, and here's an upscaled version of it, and I kind of made it, go ahead, do it more painterly, because we do this sort of thing just by drawing, right? So there's nothing inherently like evil about this process. It's art, but the barrier to entry has been lowered, so anyone can do this. Whereas before, it might have taken a skilled artist to do it. But you can look more on the Facebook page if you go see it. There's the profile picture of him it's very high quality, and I was kind of proud of it. I thought it did justice to him. But there's all sorts of ways that I could abuse my ability to generate these images. I could, for instance, there's audio recordings of his voice. I could recreate his voice with just 3 seconds of audio, and I could probably make audiobooks of him reading his own books that he wrote back to you, which would be cool. But what are the ethics involved? I don't know. I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Giants are in the land. By the way, is everyone ready for the rapture now? Or like we all dispensational premillennialists yet? Ready to get out of here? The report of the spies, Numbers 13, 25 through 29. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them, to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. We've discussed some of the fruit. Some of the fruit of the land. And they told him, we came to the land from whence you sent us, and it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. My exhortation to you is to be a Caleb. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it. for we are well able to overcome it. What I just described was a seriously hefty giant in front of us. Be a Caleb. Don't be the men who went with him. The men who had gone up with him said, "We're not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, 'What that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would we that we had died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land? To fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. The land which we had passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.' That's my exhortation to you." Our God is a giant killer. All throughout Scripture, he's killing giants. How does he kill giants? He killed a giant by riding a donkey, by humbling himself, by making himself low. He could have called down hosts of angels. But he got on a cross. He sacrificed himself for us. How do we fight giants? It's a question. It's an honest question we need to ask. We need to search the Scriptures. How do we fight these giants? One thing I know, God is a giant killer. In Amos 2, 9 through 11, that says, "Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and who was as strong as the oaks. I destroyed his fruit above and his roots beneath. Also it was I who brought you up out of the land of Egypt and led you 40 years in the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up some of your sons for prophets and some of your young men for Nazirites. Is it not indeed so, O people of Israel, declares the Lord?" God has given us a giant mandate. God said, "Let us make mankind in our image and our likeness so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground." We have a giant commission. In Matthew 28, "So when they saw him and worshipped him, but some doubted," just like Caleb's friends. And what was God's reply? "How long will these people despise me? How long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs that I have done among them, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them. I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they." We need to make sure that we reply to this, that we have faith to face these giants. And Jesus, to his church, he says, Jesus said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." We need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be involved. We do not need to be sitting on the back lines, going along for the ride. We need to be up in front and, like Daniel, taking our sling and slaying some giants. So let's think about how we can do that. Let's pray about how we can do that. I hope that I've opened your eyes to some things, that I've informed you on some things. My goal here is not to leave you in despair, to not give you a bad report, but to say that our Lord can do this. Thank you.